This is the Under the Ring Report. And now, the only two wrestling fans in the world who absolutely understood everything that came out of the Ultimate Warrior's mouth, John the Flesh Wound, and Cousin Tom.
Welcome, wrestling fans. It's another edition of the Under the Ring Report. Tom is MIA this week. We had a lot of things going on, including a big freeze here in the Midwest. I mean, I had 2 days of negative 27 below temperatures and wind chills that were hitting around 55 below. Kind of crazy. So it was kind of hard to sync up and get together for a show right now. So kind of put my hat on. This is a show I've been wanting to do for a while, and later on we'll have Tom talk about his. But finished up with a Rumble and finished up with all that. And it was some interesting shows. And we'll get into more about the road to WrestleMania later on this month. But I thought now would be a good time to kind of reminisce about your very first live wrestling event you had a chance to attend. For me, it was back in August of 1989. I was going to be a senior in high school, and I remember the WWF at that time was coming to Decatur, Illinois. And we had one, it's not a very big venue, but it's the Decatur Civic Center. I think at peak, you might be able to pack in 2,500 people if you're lucky. But back in the day, WWF used to do a lot of these smaller towns, and they'd run, one show there, and then later in the day they'd show up somewhere else and run two shows. That way they could run double shows in one day and make a little more money on their part. But I remember 1989, I was very big into professional wrestling still, and WWF was coming to town, and they were bringing arguably probably the biggest star at that moment, the Ultimate Warrior. So, myself, my little brother, we had to go see the Ultimate Warrior live in person. And it didn't disappoint, to be quite honest. Something that kind of stuck with me, and I think it made me like wrestling up until here I am now, a 47-year-old man that loves professional wrestling still to this day. And on that card that night, we got to see WWE Hall of Famer Koko B. Ware, and he defeated Barry Horowitz in that show. Also, Rockin' Robin defeated Judy Martin. Bad News Brown defeating Owen Hart as the Blue Blazer. The Bushwhackers, Hall of Famers themselves, Butch and Luke, defeating Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard as the Brainbusters, Hall of Famers also. And the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, with Sapphire, defeating Ted DiBiase and Virgil. And our main event, the Ultimate Warrior, defeating Rick Rude with Bobby the Brain Heenan at his side. So, you look right there, that is a stacked card for anyone 1989 to see. Most of those matches were SummerSlam matches. So to bring them into a small town and see those guys perform was just crazy to me at the time. Things that stood out to me, I remember, we mostly sat on our seats. We had okay seats. Trust me, a high school kid and his brother didn't have a ton of money to get ringside seats by any means. But I remember the venue was so small. We were probably only about 12 rows in the bleachers from actually being close to the ring. So you could actually see most of the action. And I remember rushing to the side where they came in, where the Bushwhackers, when they made their entrance, and someone in the crowd, I don't know what was going on, but they threw beer. And I remember one of the Bushwhackers grabbing my brother by the head and licking the beer off of his head. So, that was pretty darn cool for a couple kids at that time who were big into professional wrestling. The other part, too, was Ted DiBiase at the time had his whole angle where everybody had a price. And, he would take the money and he would stick in people's mouth if he beat them. And I remember Dusty Rhodes getting a hold of the $1 Million Man's money and giving free money away, him and Sapphire giving his money away to kids in the front rows. And all these kids screaming and losing their mind. And here we are in the very back. And I'm like, if only I had the money, we could have been right up there in the front. But it was still very cool. And it was something that always kind of stood out to me. And the Ultimate Warrior, the thing is that the persona and the energy he brought, you could feel that in the room. When he came flying into that arena and started shaking and doing the whole thing, everyone in that crowd was on their feet. And it's funny, even after all these years, I have one photo of the Ultimate Warrior standing on the ring post and looking out to the crowd. And when I look at that photo, I still kind of get goosebumps. And think of the feelings and how excited and energized I was knowing that, you know what? Here I am in a small town, Decatur, Illinois, and there is the Ultimate Warrior, the Intercontinental Champion, wrestling in front of me right now. At that time, I didn't get to see Hogan in the heyday wrestle live. It wasn't until he was in WCW later on that I did. So to me, that was probably the closest thing as seeing one of the top talents for my very first wrestling event. And to also see a guy like Bobby the Brain Heenan and Rick Rude working together, to me personally, probably one of the better pairings for Bobby. They just played off each other. And at that time, I mean, Rick Rude was probably one of the top heels. And the program that he did with the Ultimate Warrior helped make the Ultimate Warrior as big as he was and helped propel him to that WrestleMania main event with Hulk Hogan later on down the line. So to me, that's a very special memory for my very first live wrestling event. And if you want to go to Twitter at UTRR Podcast, tell me what your first wrestling live event was. It's always interesting to hear how the dates change and you know, maybe it's someone who didn't quite get into wrestling until the late 2000s. Or maybe it's someone who saw their first match in the 70s. It's always interesting to hear the things, and it could have also been an independent wrestling match you saw. You never know. There's so many out there that's what I really want to hear, is what you enjoyed. Anyway, once again, it's a short show, just some quick hit ideas because, like I said, going through some weird weather, timing, scheduling, and all that stuff with each person. So that's going to do a quick hit on our show this week. Tell me what your very first live wrestling event was. You can hit us up at UTR Podcast or go to the Facebook group and let us know. And thanks for joining us this week on the Under the Ring Report.
G'day, mateys. This is the Bushwhackers, and you're listening to Under the Ring.
Follow the Under the Ring Report on Twitter at UTRR Podcast. You can subscribe to the Under the Ring Report on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher, or visit undertheringreport.com. Thanks for listening to the Under the Ring Report.